Hi, good morning, everybody. We're just going to give a couple minutes for people to log on and get started. Welcome. Hello, everybody. We're going to give people one more minute to get logged on, and then we'll go ahead and get started. For those of you just logging on, we'll get started in just a minute. All right, well, welcome everybody. My name is Jess Eyre, and I'm the Regional Resource Director in Maryland for Care and Treatment Centers. Thanks so much for joining us today for our webinar, Family Business Dynamics, the Intersection of Psychology and Strategy. As a reminder, we will be conducting this session in webinar format, meaning all participant microphones will be muted. We will not be able to see or hear you. During the presentation, please use the Q&A or the chat feature to ask any questions. Depending on the amount of questions that we have, if we can't get to your question before the end of the hour, we will have someone from our team follow up with you directly. Today's presentation is eligible for 1 continuing education credit. We would like to thank our educational partner, CE Learning Systems, for assisting and providing these credits through co-sponsorship with the APA, American Psychological Association. Please note that in order to receive your credits, you will need to complete the post-webinar evaluation. A link will be emailed to you directly after the presentation from cego.com. After finishing the evaluation, you will have immediate access to your certification of completion. Today, I am proud to announce our presenters, Josephine, Tynes, and Jonathan Saltzburg. Josie is the Executive Director of Caron, Florida. She oversees clinical and administrative operations for Caron Renaissance and Caron Ocean Drive, providing support and supervision to both clinical and operational staff and building relationships with clients, families, and referents. Since joining Caron in 2014, Josie has also worked as a primary therapist for both Caron Renaissance and Caron Ocean Drive. Her systems-based perspective embodies the Caron philosophy that the patient is the family and the family is the patient. Through her supervision of clinical staff, she fosters treatment plans specifically designed to address each client's and family's needs. In addition to her International Counselor certification, she is certified to treat compulsive shopping, stealing, spending, and hoarding. Jonathan Saltzburg serves as the Executive Director of College Success and Career Services at Caron Treatment Centers for both Florida and Pennsylvania. Jonathan manages several innovative programs to help individuals examine what success in recovery means to them, strategically realign their career and recovery goals to achieve it, and ultimately enhance their quality of life. He founded Recovery EDU to provide guidance and resources for students to achieve their academic goals while in a continuum of care. Jonathan comes from a lineage of a family business system in Pennsylvania that went through the 3rd generation until the business shifted focus. Please welcome Jonathan and Josie.
Thanks so much, Jess, and thanks everyone for joining us today. Jonathan, thank you so much for working on this presentation with me and for being here. We're really, really excited. This is something that Jonathan and I are both extremely passionate about, so looking forward to the next 50 minutes or so that we have together. To go over some of the learning objectives for today, We really wanted to help to identify what are some of the key components to look at when working with family businesses or multi-generational wealth within family systems. What are some of the tools that we use in order to address family conflicts, either with substance use disorder, process disorders, any kind of mental health issues, and also looking at what are some of the evidence-based interventions that we're using to address some of the issues with our patients, and also, to engage some of our family members in treatment, as well as other stakeholders within a family business. And then if we can just go to the next slide. Perfect. And we also wanted to look at some of the treatment protocols that Jonathan and I will go over through some of the case studies as we go farther along in the presentation. And part of that will also be looking at assessment. One thing that I did want to say that's important, Jonathan and I wanted to highlight to everyone here, is the collaborative process that we at Caron, specifically at Ocean Drive, utilize when looking at family business dynamics. We are not family business consultants, and we certainly know that. But we do like to look at family businesses as part of our treatment process, as part of the recovery process. And we really, really appreciate the strategic partnerships we have with family business consultants, our referents, and outside professionals as well.
Awesome. I'm going to jump in now. So thank you so much, Josie. I am so excited to be here. Again, as Jess said, I am from a family business, third generation. One of the things I wanted to bring up and kind of put out there is that, Caron Treatment Centers, we're talking about family businesses, what treatment and family business. And one of the things I really want to talk about and start with was a call to action. Like, yes, we do need to talk about it. And the reason being is that if the patient's the family's the patient, and we're dealing with identified family members that are coming from family businesses, we really need to understand the terminology of business, the language of business, and the language of the system that they're working in, and the operations and the strategy of the current business they're going back to in the business. And one of the great individuals who really developed family systems theories in family business is David Bork. So I really want to credit him for a lot of the footwork that we've looked at and frameworks that we've looked at in integrating. And he has an incredible book called Family Business, Risky Business, How to Make It Work. And to jump into it again, is, we're really, by supporting the family, the identified family member from the family business that's coming here, by addressing the family system, in effect, we're helping the family business. And we're going to get later into why does it matter, family businesses, how does that affect me clinically, how does that affect me in everyday life? And we're going to show you the data, which is really, really fascinating, about how family business and family controlled businesses are so spread throughout this country and this world. In fact, 11 of the 12 largest publicly traded firms are family controlled, based on Dr. Amit's research from the Wharton School of Business. So one of the things, the other call to action that I'm going to talk about, are ideas and concepts we're going to talk about, is watch out when you're working with family systems and family businesses. What we've noticed is watch out for cognitive entrenchment. It's a term that we're going to use a little bit throughout this seminar. And what cognitive entrenchment really is the act of experienced groups becoming rigid under pressure, and they revert back to what they know. They revert back to what they have experienced over the past year. So we see that with family businesses and family systems, in that they revert back to the rules, the hidden rules that they know, right? And in the business system, the family business really reverts back to the what's worked in the past. However, what's worked in the past may not be what's working in the future. So again, understanding business terminology, understanding the concept of psychology and the intersection of strategy and finance. Another kind of piece, an interesting piece, I wanted to share is the Aldi brothers, right? Aldi. For those of you who don't know, Aldi, one of the Aldi brothers, or one of the Aldi companies, actually owned Trader Joe's. Another one of the Aldi companies actually owned Aldi, the grocery store in the United States, right? And throughout Europe. Aldi is an incredible example, and this is obviously, you can look it up, of a family firm that was founded by the grandfather, and the brothers took over in the 1900s and expanded from one grocery store to multiple grocery chains. In the 1940s, and I could get the data wrong on that, the stats wrong, is that they split up because of a disagreement, a substantial disagreement. The story goes, and this may or may not be fully accurate, but I can assure you that a lot of my Wharton professors use that language in talking about this story, so hopefully it is accurate, is that the brothers fought over the idea of the grocery store selling cigarettes, right? The idea of whether to sell cigarettes in the grocery store. And they fought over that so intensely that they split up, right? The company split up. So they're actually now the Audi company that owns the Trader Joe's is substantially operates completely independent from the other brother that owns the Audi, right? So I think that's really interesting about disagreements and how much disagreements can lend itself to breakups and splits and et cetera. And another call to action is if you're a clinician, if you're a treatment center, if you're a family office or family business, we need help. We need to work and collaborate. Again, I do want to take a second to share, of the background of my background and Josie's background, which was shared earlier, is that we are working within a treatment center, a behavioral healthcare center. And we happen to work with the clients that come from various backgrounds, but a lot of them come from family businesses and are looking to go back to family businesses. So as clinicians, luckily Josie understands the business terminology, understands best practices, sound practices based on her curriculum at Brown and her other experience. And I graduated from the Wharton School of Business where I studied finance and marketing. So really understanding and working at a large company, Warner Media, understanding how large businesses work, we're able to really integrate that on a smaller level down here at Karen Renaissance, Karen Ocean Drive, and throughout Karen. But we need to work with family offices. So, and we need help and support. We are not looking to be family consultants to continue supporting patients in a longevity perspective with regard to the family business. So we need support and we're looking forward to collaborating. So the next slide, please. So if you think about SAMHSA, right, and you think about the working definition of recovery, which I love the working definition of recovery, and I'm going to read it, is SAMHSA's, the working definition of recovery is a process of change through which individuals improve their health, wellness, and live a self-directed life and strive to reach their full potential. So if we take a step back and listen to that term, right? Because I mean, again, I don't know all the 200, 300 people that are on this seminar, but I can assure you that a lot of them are clinical and a lot of them have experience hearing the barriers to, hey, I don't want to get sober. It shouldn't be binary. I don't want to cure. I can't pick up a drink. I can't pick up a drug. Sometimes it helps to just talk about, okay, quality life. How can we help you get better? How can we help you realize your potential, right? And I think it's really correlated to getting the most out of life. And if we correlate that to business, looking at optimization versus maximization, which is a common thing that companies look at when they're looking at how to really optimize and allocate their resources, right? And family businesses typically have those decisions that they have to make, and they look at a very long time horizon because they want to pass it on to the next generation. So when we start looking at optimization, how to gain the most out of your experience in recovery, how to get the most out of your experience at work and being a contributing member, they're really consistent and they really kind of go far when I use that terminology with family businesses. And I'm going to jump to Josie on. She's going to talk about treating the underlying issue, which I kind of discussed earlier. Josie.
We were having some technical difficulty with Josie. The webinar kicked her off.
Well, I can speak to that underlying issue. So again, what I said earlier is rather to get into a power struggle with regard to, hey, are you gonna stop using or engaging in substance use disorder, or are you gonna stop not pick up the drink or whatnot? Talking about the underlying issues of what's behind it, right? You're trying to be controlled, and that's why, right? Or that you feel like, you're really not pursuing the field or career that you really want to look at. Okay, let's talk about that. So really looking at the underlying issues, characterologically, psychologically, as well as family of origin, and obviously the substance use history as well. So we can go on to the next slide, and I believe Josie is back. So she's back in business, right? So, I'm up still, huh? So I really see my role and our role with working with family systems and family businesses is removing barriers to accessing care. So for those of you who don't know, I had the opportunity and privilege to work at Cairn in 2010 to launch what we call the College Success Program, the Academic Success Program. And how does that pertain to this concept? I'll talk to you. The idea behind that was professionals, students all face one challenge, right? I don't want to go to treatment, right? Not one challenge, multiple challenges, but the barrier to getting to treatment is I got to work, I got to do school, I got to get back to work, I got to do this. I don't have the time to get well, right? How many times do we hear that? Or the parents saying that. So we're seeing very similar things with family businesses, right? Common thing, I got this under control at the business. He or she will not be allowed back until he gets it together. In fact, I spoke to a member of a family business the other day about how they're going to implement and enforce breathalyzers so that, when the identified family member drives the business car, the family business car, or the business car, the company car, excuse me, they're going to blow into a breathalyzer and then be able to drive the car. So the question is, if that business is more than 50 people, are they doing that for any person that's struggling with alcohol? So inconsistent policies, procedures can create vulnerability and exposure for businesses, right? So that's what I'm getting at. So this control and this aspect, maybe they don't have it all together. We need to look at this. Someone coming to you, how does it affect their ability to continue to perform work? Me and the patients where they're at, can someone work in a business while in treatment and care, right? If he goes to treatment, how will that affect the business employees? And small family business to larger family businesses, individuals know what's going on. How's the culture been affected by addiction, right? So that's what we hear. And I want to talk to the parallel about with the college students that we work with or come to treatment. We often hear from parents, I've spent all this money on education. I want to see them complete what they started. I messed up my GPA. I've been expelled. What do I do? I can't go back to the family business. What do I do? The common theme here is what we need to provide is hope through strategy and through collaboration with the clinical team. So I see ourselves as removing barriers to accessing care. Please, to the next slide.
So thanks, guys, and thanks for being patient with my technical difficulties. I could hear you, so I heard that Jonathan tried to pull me in before it was my turn to talk, but I'm back just in time. So I wanted to talk a little bit about our systems approach and the importance of creating a therapeutic alliance when we're treating individuals coming from family businesses. So systemically, we want to look at supporting a patient from the transition prior to entering into treatment, during their time in treatment, and in order to connect the patient and family to appropriate resources after treatment, be it family business consultants, private practice therapists, people that we're able to work with and collaborate with during the treatment process and identifying those providers early on and throughout the discharge process and the aftercare process as well. So looking at what are the systems involved? Is there a board? Are there trust officers? Is it a multi-generational family business? Is it a family business that maybe the owner is involved in still and we're treating the second generation and there's a lot of discord or question as to whose responsibility is what? Is the leverage as far as trying to have someone enter into treatment being appropriately utilized, or is there an abuse of power in the system, which is something that we'll see a lot? And also looking at, what are some of the other systems that are involved outside of the family? Are there any kind of financial implications due to someone's substance use? Is there someone who's been gambling with money within the business? What are there legal institutions that are involved? Are there other businesses that are involved? And really trying to parse out who the players are and act as a liaison to bring those pieces together and help support the patient through the transition. So if we go to the next slide, I'll actually talk about the next two bullets as well. So also looking at, what are the ways that we can appropriately challenge some of the parts of the system, and then we'll talk a little bit about the impact. Jonathan and I will talk about that together, but, are we able to appropriately challenge not only the patient, but the rest of the family to look at, what are the multi-generational themes within the business? What are some of the individual's family of origin? Maybe looking at if it's a patriarchal system, what are some of the matriarchal themes within that lineage, within the family too? So really trying to tie on the background and see how that's affecting not only someone's recovery process from a clinical perspective, but also tying it into the impact that Jonathan's going to talk about in a minute is, what are the financial implications of those unresolved clinical issues too, and what's the intersection between the clinical issues and the financial implications as far as an impediment for someone to make good business decisions based on not only substance use, but maybe unresolved trauma, things of that nature. So Jonathan, I'll let you talk a little bit about the impact.
Thank you, Josie, and welcome back. Sorry about the technical issue. The impact, you can see the numbers here, but what I want to highlight is 2020 has been, and 2021 has been a really, really tough year, right? With COVID and its impact on substance use disorder and its impact on mental health, and the drug overdose deaths, which hit record levels in 2020. The economic loss that we see from addiction and from other mental health issues is, $40 billion annually in costs. And I just think about the families that we work with that are part of family businesses and those they employ, right? And when I see us trying to get them access to care and help, and the importance of that, and how that includes lost productivity in those numbers, but also businesses that aren't able to sustain related to addiction. Attorneys, there's a lot of data and research that came out in 2017 of the Betty Ford study, twice the rate of alcohol use disorder in the general population. And then obviously on the college front, just a lot of unintentional injuries and assaults. It hits hard, and there's a real impact. And so we can go on to the next slide. So listen, I want to, my perspective, and I just want to share this out there, is that, we believe in sustainability. When I talk about sustainability, or we as an organization, sustainable recovery, right? Sustainable family systems, sustainable family recovery, right? And I also use that same language when I talk about businesses, right? When we talk about what's sustainable for the family business, right? And that language of how those interchange, right? And what's the data on businesses? What's the data on family businesses? Or how do they add value to our country? How do they add value to the economy? How do they add value, right? And we have all opinions, but the data from Harvard Business Review is very, very interesting. And there's books, and there's also surveys. And this survey was done on 149 companies that met a certain threshold of market valuation. And so it shows in these kind of fancy graphs, I guess, that we show here, is that family businesses actually lag a little bit slightly, on a long-term basis with regard to return on equity or growth in the business. So, however, if you notice in 2008 with the Great Recession, and then 97 when we had another recession, and the data is still showing for this current recession that we just had earlier in 2020, is that family businesses tend to do better on average during great recessions, right? Or during recessions or slumps in business cycles. And the theory that the author of this paper suggests is that because family businesses look over long-term horizons, right? So they're not making decisions that are just based on, and this obviously is the generalization, but best practice, they're suggesting that family businesses are looking 30, 40, 50-year time horizons so that the business sustains the next generation. So on average. So I thought that was a really interesting slide and a really interesting survey. And I'm going to take this a step further, because I think this is really, really important to hear, is that, based on the data, for those who, one of the hardest things about family businesses and family controlled firms is getting data, right? For me to talk about data, what is that data, right? There isn't that much data on family businesses because they're family controlled, right? Some of them are publicly traded, some are not publicly traded, but some very often private, right? So, so for those who are interested in learning more about the data, we have the research that's listed at the end of the slides, but also the Ward and Global Family Alliance is a great data site to go to. Professor Amit, who is like world renowned for family businesses and what he's doing at Ward, is remarkable. Dr. David Wessels. So I share that because I'm going to jump into some of their research, some of their discussion around profitability. The data shows that profitability overall, if we look at the S&P 500, what explains the variance in profitability versus different firms? So what we're saying is, on average, why does one firm do better than the other, right? So instead of getting through all this and playing I usually ask questions, is it because of the firm? Is it because of the industry? Or is it because of the management or leaders, right? Or corporations, let's say. The data shows that profitability is a function of great leadership and great management. We can go into that why, and we can talk about that offline. So if that is the case, that profitability, so we're going to use profitability as an assumption for sustainability, then really we as clinicians and we as individuals that are supporting these family business leaders going back to the family business have to be aware of what the strategic blueprint or strategic plan looks like for the family business and how will that affect or influence the individual's recovery. So I know that was a lot to say, but so anyway, I thought that was an interesting slide, and the data is, it's hard to find, but it's really fun to find. So we can go to the next slide. Thank you.
Thanks so much, Jonathan. So speaking to sustainability, not only looking at generationally within a family business from a sustainability perspective, but also from a recovery perspective, when we're talking about, how do we have the head of the family business, if that's who we're working with, or that second generation, maybe the visionary, right, who is coming in and seeing how mom or dad didn't handle things in the way that they thought they would, or they want to bring the business into the times with technology or whatever that is. When we look at that kind of sustainability, we also want to see, does that individual have sustainable recovery? Because if an individual that we're working with doesn't have sustainable recovery, or the family even more so doesn't have sustainable recovery, because as we know, a family can be in recovery without a patient. However, it's very hard for a patient to be in recovery without a family. We need to look at what are some of the inconsistencies within not only the family system, but how do those expand within the business from that systemic perspective? So, is the identified family member or the identified patient's treatment within the family business consistent with that of other employees? And furthermore, are they consistent with that of other family members? If there are siblings involved, parents, looking from a multi-generational perspective, but we specifically see this when there are multiple siblings that are involved within a family business. What's the environment like? Is it professional? A lot of the time we'll see that it's a more professional environment for the people who aren't in the family, but those who are within the family and leading the business, there can be less professionalism. So, is my paycheck being held as a means for me to come to treatment? Is that a good thing or is that a bad thing, right? Depends upon the circumstance. Are we able to have enough family members participate in the treatment process, which, having family participation is actually a requirement for admission for Karen of Florida. So, are they able to participate in the process in a way that, promotes honesty or transparency, and we're able to actually identify, what does the professionalism look like within the business? Another thing that Jonathan and I find oftentimes as an issue is there's not a direct reporting structure. So looking at, what are the boundaries? So, am I having boundaries within, my family members that I'm working with? If not, and those boundaries are blurred, how does that translate to the rest of the employees? And then how does that environment with those blurred boundaries impede my ability to enter back into that system when I leave treatment in order to have work and have passion and purpose and my legacy as part of my recovery? We have found that the family business system is equally as important as a family system itself to be intact and to be in a way where everyone is working on their own issues and they're able to move toward recovery individually and as a family. Otherwise, it really impedes someone's ability to stay sober, because that's where we're all spending the majority of our time, whether we like to admit it or not, is at work. So, I think it's really important to dissect the family business in the same way that you would dissect any family system that you're working with. So we can skip the next slide. And, again, these are just kind of the same pieces, but with a little bit of a different title, looking at from the mental health perspective, and also looking at, to Jonathan's point, there's not a lot of data on what works. So you see those silos when you work with a family, you see those silos when you work with a family business too. So when we're able to have that rich data that's entrenched within that family system, it's really, really helpful for us to utilize to know what works and what doesn't. So when we wanted to look at what are some of the characteristics of families that we work with that are engaged in family businesses, we chose to look at it from a dependency perspective and looking at a dependent family. So, what does the denial system look like? Is it intact? How entrenched is it? Sometimes, the head of business in a multi-generational family business has an entrenched denial system, not only for that head of the business at the time, but the one before that and the one before that, right? So if we're looking at 2 and 3 generations back, how far deep does this denial system, how far deep is it rooted? And is it with this individual or is it with the role? And then do we need to deconstruct the role that someone's in? How much are we looking at an individual living up to a label within not only a family system, but within a family business as well? Are there higher expectations for the individuals that are in the family system than the rest of the employees? So looking at those blurred boundaries again, sometimes there are way lower expectations, and I may be Jonathan's sister and we may work together and I may roll in at 9:15 and everyone else comes in at 8:30, right? But no one says anything because I'm Jonathan's sister. Or do I have an overbearing mother and father, and if I get there at 8:29, someone tells me if I'm not 5 minutes early, I'm late, but the rest of the team can come in at 8:35 or 8:40. So on both sides of the coin, equally as damaging. Looking at feelings of inadequacy as well. What am I trying to live up to? Whose shoes am I trying to fill? Because it might not only be my supervisor at work, but my supervisor might also be my parent or my grandparent who I look up to, and I went to the same school that they did, and I want to take the business over in the same way that they did. What are some of these unspoken messages that oftentimes, show up as relational trauma, and how is that affecting an individual's development, and how is that development affecting their coping, right? And are they coping with substances? And if they are, how is that affecting the systems that they interact with within the business? And also looking at the outward appearances, right? So are my insides matching my outsides? Or going back to that data that Jonathan talked about, is am I willing to report when we're profitable? Am I willing to report when we're struggling? Because if I'm not, or if I do, then you might find out if you open the door that there are some other issues that are hidden in the closet. So we can go to the next slide too. Also looking, a bit at process disorders. I've spoken about substance use primarily, but looking at eating disorders, some of my specializations in process disorders, gambling, compulsive spending, compulsive theft. We just wanted to reiterate here that the assessment process and the messages around seeking help are the same, if not sometimes more entrenched, because sometimes, as most of you know here who are clinicians, process disorders are more socially acceptable, right, than substance use disorders sometimes. If I spend a bit too much money, but I buy a nice car, that might be easier than if, I'm abusing opiates and I'm falling asleep, or, I'm overdosing, or there are some more, in your face kind of consequences. But looking at, what's the stigma around process disorders? What are the messages around getting help in the family, not only for substance use, but also for mental health and any sort of process addictions, and looking at the family role in that recovery process as being equally as important as the recovery process for substance use disorders as well. So looking at the, thanks, Jonathan, I'll let you take this one.
Okay, gotcha. Thanks. So looking at family business basics and treatment. So, if you look at a definition of a family business, a family-owned business may be defined as any business which 2 or more family members are involved, and most ownership and control lies within a family. So we're really not going to decipher what's the difference between a family-controlled firm and a family business. I just thought that for that generalization is really important to see the definition. When I'm looking at family businesses and I'm thinking with the clinical team on how to support the patient, what's best for the patient, what's best for the family, and what's best for the family business. Those are really 3 deep questions, right? And they can go together, but in some cases they may or may not. And let me give you an example. My great grandfather, Papa Lewis, was he formed the business, and my dad tells me a story when he went into Papa Lewis's office. He was 24 years old, and Papa Lewis, I want to be a lawyer. I'm so excited. I want to be a lawyer, and I want to figure out a way to do it so I can help the business. And Papa Lewis said, Papa Lewis was a sweet man to me. I was 6 years old, but that's how I remember. But he said to my father, he said, you don't go to law school. If you go to law school, you're not in the family business. And my dad didn't go to law school, right? And not to say it's right or wrong, but I guess that example I want to share, which is kind of, just about me and my family, is that it kind of reflects, a decision that he made And he looks back and he says, yeah, that would have been good. I really could have really enjoyed that. That's something I was interested in, and how those kind of hierarchies and those visionaries affect and influence our decisions. So what's best for the patient, what's best in that situation, and what's best for the family and family business. My dad became the CEO, was very helpful for the business. But was he really not pursuing his passion? And we see that a lot. And how do we address each component of this system? And I think that when you're looking and working with patients and clients, to really collaborate as clinicians with family business specialists, family business advisors, all these consultants that you can really engage with if you have a member of a family business to help be able to kind of address these components. I also want to say to kind of, when I also think about businesses and family businesses, I think in the lens of governance, operations, strategy, and finance. And those are kind of four frameworks I look at from a governance standpoint, like Josie was saying. Who are they reporting to? What's the accountability look like? From an operations standpoint, how's the company currently operating? You could be like, why do we need to know about the operations? Well, you don't need to know the detail, but having some framework of what's the operation, what's the business model, what's the history and context of that is very helpful. And having some understanding of the strategy of the business, without the client feeling comfortable enough to share that with you, but understanding what's its 5-10 year perspective. Remember, strategy is not the goal. Strategy is the plan on how to get to the goal. So I think the plan and understanding what the company's plan is very helpful. And then obviously finance, not necessarily understanding all the details, but I mean, it's important. Like Josie said, like in family, you have owner operator roles. When families are owners and operators, they can be getting a salary and a dividend distribution, and it creates some resentments that other siblings may feel. So when I talk about finance, which is a touchy subject, I think there is some understanding that you need to understand, to be able to provide best practices with regard to mentoring, supervising, clinically providing for the family system. So next slide. Motivation and change. So Josie and I will both do this one. So we believe at Karen Treatment Centers that meaningful and purposeful work are incredible motivators for us. Like the existential questions of what's our professional identity? What is our meaning and purpose? Who are we meant to be, right? Realizing our potential, right? Tapping into that true self, right? Not necessarily what mom or dad wants us to do, or not necessarily what our significant other wants to do. What is really consistent with our values? And that takes some work, right? To look, maybe reevaluate what our values and styles are, right? But what I want to share with you all is by addressing this, I have seen such better patient engagement through a lot of different factors by having these conversations. So I'm going to let Josie take over for that.
So thanks, Jonathan. And I think that's really important what you just said, and also in relation to when I was just speaking previously about some of the process disorder pieces as well, it's like, what is the legacy that I want to leave, as an individual, and what is the legacy that I want to leave for my family, right? And furthermore, when I'm looking at coming from a family business, specifically a multi-generational family business, what impact am I going to have on that multi-generational legacy, which is a huge question. It's a lot of pressure sometimes. And like Jonathan said, it's existential in nature. So looking at how can we jump in with the individuals that we're working with and help them to figure out what those answers to those questions are, or at least what are the rocks that I need to turn over to see where the answer might be, in order to motivate someone to one step closer toward recovery. Because I may not come into treatment and say, I want to get sober, I want to stop drinking for the rest of my life. And I may come into treatment and say, I really want to make sure that I have an impact positively on my family, or I really don't want to miss another one of my son or my daughter's graduations, or, I really don't want to be the reason that legal gets involved in our family business again. Okay, so how can we look at what your goal is, which is having some kind of lasting impact, with what your family or your interventionist goal is, which is for you to get sober? And how do we pull the levers at the right times in order to help motivate to a place that the goals for the patient and the goals for the family align, and the goals for the business as well? So talking about stages of change, for those of you that have written a DAP note, I'm sure you've put a stage of change in almost every DAP note that you've written, certainly if you work in an inpatient environment. But, not only what stage is the family in, or is the patient in, what stage is the family in as well? So, oftentimes those will not intersect, and the patient and the family will not be in the same stage of change at the same time. But how do we roll with that resistance and use it in a way for the family to motivate the patient when the patient might not be as motivated, or the patient to motivate the family when the family might not be as motivated? And tying it back to legacy as well, I'm a big fan of Erik Erikson, and when we look at Erikson's stages of development and we talk about successful transition planning and we talk about legacy, am I coming from a place of egocentrism, or am I coming from a place of other-centeredness, right? And, as I look at my impact on life as I get through those 6 and 7 stages of development, coming from the framework of Erikson, what is my message going to be to the people that are left behind me, not only on the world, but specifically as it relates to my family and to these multi-generational businesses? So we can go to the next slide.
So this is the fun part where we get to talk about some case studies, but we're also going to be conscious of the time. So these case studies are mixed and molded, so there's no patient information. So they've been changed to protect everyone's identity. But the first example that I like to speak about is this client that we worked with years ago, that talking about intangible assets that you can't measure, right? You have a tangible asset is, your home, or, something, or equipment, or something that's, is able to be felt and physical. Intangible assets in this case was a family business that doesn't have any assets. There's no, building, there's no plant property, there's none of that stuff. It's just the business is the relationships that dad has with all these different individuals to provide, construction services, let's say, right? So what you're going to say that. So the very enmeshed relationship, the patient comes in married, very enmeshed, and the big piece was that they had a position in the family business, and the father was getting reports from the foreman, as well as his significant other were getting reports from the foreman that the son or daughter was not showing up, or when they were showing up, appeared to be somewhat intoxicated or out of it, right? So that was one of the precipitating factors that led them to this person getting help, right? And one of the things, the leverage that was used, like, you are going to get help or you're not coming back to the business, right? So that was one of the factors, and that's one of the questions we have: can leverage save lives? So we can talk about that. Is that helpful? But the enmeshment was so interesting in this case. When I talk about the enmeshment, it was fascinating because, me as trying to support the clinical team and building a relationship with the patient, and trying to speak to the family, understand that the family business model, and dad being in his late 60s, and what does a succession or future look like, just for us to know, is this individual part of the succession plan, if we're able to help him and support him and the family to get well. And it was so interesting during these calls, what I kind of tried to compartmentalize was, trying to understand the business model, trying to understand the idea. And then mom would say, well, he needs to make his marriage work, right? He needs to make this work. But the conversation was going in there was directly about, okay, can he return to the business? So what that symbolizes, and where this took us, was that the, mom and dad were both very enmeshed with him and his personal relationship, and were getting frustrated during at work. If they heard something wasn't going well at home, they would bring up during the workday, and he would get angry, and then he would drink, and then so this dysfunction. So kind of the course in treatment really individuating that, so that the times that we were talking with the family, right, and the son started joining those calls, was purely about, what if so-and-so wants to return to the business, identifying that, what is that going to look like? So really developing and flushing out what are the roles and responsibilities that so-and-so is going to have if they return. So I had the individual develop roles and responsibilities, present it to dad, and really have conversations about what his role would look like, right? Now, that's only one piece. Who's going to monitor and keep that accountable? So the recommendation from the clinical team, as well as support from us, was this young man, or this person, this individual, cannot be reporting to dad anymore. It's unhealthy. So we looked at the reporting structure. He started reporting to the chief operating officer. So we changed different things. And then the last piece was really working locally when they returned with a family business psychologist or a family business advisor, really working with them so that time was set aside where they would talk about the issues that came up at work. So that could be compartmentalized. So no talking at dinner about work. No talk. I mean, I know this sounds pretty black and white and there's always gray, but really creating some clear and delineation between so-and-so is coming back home. They're no longer reporting to you. You certainly, that person is reporting to you who they're reporting to. How are you going to be able to create some accountability with regard to speaking to that person? And yet you can speak to so-and-so every 2 weeks through this family business psychologist about the business. So really kind of getting granular with that. So that's how we looked at with this case study one, and this so-and-so did return to the business with that kind of level of structure and accountability. So I'll let Josie jump in. We'll go to the next one.
So the next case study, Jonathan and I actually worked together. There's 2 more after this one, but we'll speak for a few minutes on this, and then I want to leave some time for questions too. So if there's time, Jonathan and I'll maybe pick one of the other case studies. But if anyone wants to hear, after this about the case studies, like Jess said in the beginning, feel free to contact one of us, and we're happy to go through them afterward as well. So this was a family Jonathan and I worked with that was pretty interesting, and a multi-generation family legacy. And so what we were able to look at, I'll speak to the clinical perspective and Jonathan can speak to the business perspective on this case, which is really looking at what is the generational loss. And we're talking about going 4, 5, 6 generations back. What's the trauma and what's the hidden substance use disorder history? Because as I mentioned earlier about the roles that someone steps into as the patriarch or the matriarch of the family, depending upon culturally, who that leader is, what are the things that we bury under the rug when we step into that role, right? And do we have an individual that we're working with who's able to be honest enough, or have built enough rapport, rather so, that the individual feels safe enough to tell us what's actually going on? Looking at the course of treatment, this was an individual who asked to come into treatment for 2 weeks. This individual ended up staying for about 10 months, which was not their intention or the family's intention, I think, when they came in. But as we started to peel back the layers, the family wasn't as invested, but the individual became invested in the treatment process and was able to develop a level of autonomy in order to then have enough of a voice to pull the family in, and for the family to start to be able to do some of their own work too. So looking at, this shared loss between the identified patient and the family, that none of them had really talked about, and how everyone, not only from the perspective of, clinical interactions, but from a business perspective too, there was this loss of this matriarchal figure within this family system that no one had ever talked about. But, everyone within the family had tried to put another mom in the system, right? And so, what is the unspoken resentment? What is the unspoken hurt, and how are we making up for this lost role? How is that affecting us as individuals? How is that affecting an individual's ability to, engage in recovery? And how is that affecting the family name and the family legacy? So looking at the primary clinical components, what was the boundary setting that the individual had to set with the rest of the family members? What does the reintegration process look like, which was a back and forth between the geographic location where the family was and the individual being with us in Florida, starting at maybe a week up north, 3 weeks down here, 2 weeks, 2 weeks, 1 week, 1 week, and so on and so forth, so that individual was able to successfully reintegrate back into their home environment. And also looking at the individuation, this individual was younger than most of the people that we work with. So, how do we mix the family business also with that educational component that Jonathan talked about too, because it's not only necessarily applicable to younger individuals, but within family businesses, a lot of the time we'll see that someone hasn't pursued an education and been placed in a role that they may or may not be qualified for. So helping someone with that unfinished business to feel as if they deserve the role that they're in and they've earned that. I'll let Jonathan speak to kind of the business aspects of this case briefly.
Yeah, I think that the key piece with this case is the strategic blueprint, the strategic plan where the company is looking to grow, is that consistent with the individual's values, right? So looking at the past, which is really important, and the ties and the connection and the guilt and remorse and the grief, right? Which needs to be dealt with, but also, does that individual want to be part of the future of this company, right? Is it because of an obligation, or is it because of something that really is that they're connected with? So I think really evaluating, having and collaborating with the with the family, right? Those in charge of the business, and understanding, what that looks like, and going back to what are your roles and responsibilities? How do you feel the self-esteem of being in a role that you deserve and earn? Believe it or not, a lot of the cases are clients of family businesses that want to feel like they're being compensated appropriately and they've earned their keep, right? So in this case was a great example of someone going back and graduating, or going back to graduate, finishing college, never finished, right? And wanted to pursue that so they could add value. So really looking at professionalizing it, and really looking at boundaries, and really looking again at understanding the business model. I really am going to say that. I think that's a little, is as individuals, as professionals in this field, I think it is important to understand the client and the family systems business model, so that we can better be able to prepare and support the reunification back into the business, if that's clinically appropriate. So thank you.
So I'll just give a 20-second blurb on the next two cases, because I promised that I'd finish around 12:50. So if we want to go to the next case study. So Jonathan and I worked on this case together as well, and the primary purpose of this was, there were multiple individuals who were in various stages of a recovery process with this family, and it was a third-generation business that the company was being taken public. So each individual within the system, ensuring that they had their own recovery program and they had professionals that they were working with to support them through the transition, and also looking at how does this external exposure to the outside world and this recently amassed wealth affect the family's values, the individual's values, in addition to the values of recovery that each person had. So that'll be my 30-second snapshot of this case. And the final case, if we go to the next slide, is this is something that both Jonathan and I touched on a little bit earlier, which is, the second generation of the family looking at, I'm in charge now, I'm taking over, dad is older, he's going to retire in this situation, and I really want to be the visionary. I really want to look at how can I take this business into the next generation. And also, the old guards stepping out and saying, but I need to maintain control, right? So looking at how does, our identified patients' vision and strategy affect the dynamics intergenerationally and within the family, and also how to create, which this was the main challenge, a system of checks and balances so that the identified patient that Jonathan and I worked with had a sustainable recovery that was observable but not intrusive or monitored by the family, so that they were able to individuate and earn enough respect and earn enough trust from the rest of the family in order to take the business into the next step. So if you have any questions on those, just feel free to let us know.
The only one thing I want to add to that is the identity, our professional identity. If we're not the visionary, if we've been in this company for 50 years, our fathers or our mothers have led this company, now we're doing it. Who are we when we're not running this business? This professional identity, who are we, right? So there's a lot, the control piece, but also I think one of the great things that Josie and the team here, really the empathy of understanding all sides of it, right? Because and what that could lead to if we're not in the business, right? So thank you so much.
Thank you, Josie and Jonathan. You guys did an exceptional job. We're not going to answer some of the questions that were submitted through the registration process. And then if we have time, we'll do some of the live questions that are coming in. So one question that we received is, utilizing a genogram can shed light on multi-generational family patterns, challenges, and strengths. Would a similar exercise be useful for family businesses, particularly those that are multi-generational?
So I'll go ahead and take that one. So interestingly enough, I think Jonathan and I have stereotypical conflicting views on the answer to this question. And I think, I'll highlight that in jest, but also in seriousness, that, that is why having the clinical and the business minds together working on family business cases is so important. So I love a genogram. I think a genogram is a really, really useful tool. We can look at what are some of those clinical patterns, especially if I'm able to go back 2 or 3 generations. You can tell how excited I am by just talking about it, how much I love a genogram. But we're able to see what are some of the unresolved patterns within the family system. And also I'm able to, say I'm representing the clinical portion of the case, pass that information on to Jonathan and say, here are some touch points. Here are some pain spots. Here is, unresolved loss in this side. So if we're looking at restructuring a family business and we're taking something away from someone who has an unresolved loss that may go back 1 or 2 generations, cellular trauma, developmental trauma, something like that, how do I frame that in a way that's going to be successful for that individual to process and also for the sustainability of the business? So that's a long way of saying, yes, I do think that they're helpful, and I do think it's a helpful exercise when working with a family business.
Great, thank you very much. Another question, can you give some examples of how Karen has treated a non-traditional family unit that might include a wealth manager or a business partner?
I'll take that. Yes. So it's a great question. I mean, I think that what we do really well is we still look at it in the family systems lens, right? So getting the proper releases signed, right? So we will and can speak with those individuals, right? So and those individuals are going to be really key for the key stakeholders, right, in the individual's recovery, if you think about it, and their return back to work or the return back to the family business. So I think that, yes, we do, and we've done it, and we continue to do it. I think that what is the scope? What is our scope, right, with that? And the scope with that, what I mean by scope, is not really talking about, to the business partner, you should be doing this better in the business. The scope is like, what's coming up with these feelings? How are you communicating when so-and-so doesn't do the work they need to do, and vice versa? And what happens? You guys blow up at each other? Okay, that's really not helping the 50 employees that are watching that. And how does it affect the culture? But really, what can we do to support that better communication? A lot is about communication and strategy, right? Not strategy for the business, but strategy on communication, right? So yes, I think it's a huge, huge value proposition for what we do, is not just speaking just to the direct family, but to those involved, the stakeholders, right? And there's a lot of stakeholders involved with family businesses in general. So Josie, if you want to add anything.
No, I think you certainly covered that. And I promised I'd be mindful of time, so I won't add anything extra. I'll let Jess get on to any other questions if we have any more.
Okay, so we've got 1 more minute. I'll do 1 more question for you guys. Is it healthy or okay to utilize the family business as leverage to encourage a family member to seek help? For example, you need to go to treatment if you want to keep your role in the family business.
So I think I'll give a quick snapshot and then I'll let Jonathan answer. I think my short response would be yes, if you're utilizing that leverage in conjunction in working with professionals, mental health professionals, or family business consultants. So, is a family on their own intervening and saying, I'll take you out of the business, always the healthiest perspective? Not always, because we're only able to operate within the context of our own experience, right? But if I'm working with a trained interventionist, or I'm working with a trained clinician, or I'm working with a trained case management team, can that be appropriate leverage when used the right way? Absolutely. Jonathan, do you want to add anything to that?
I mean, my saying is, this is just my personal opinion, is that leverage can save lives, right? And what I mean by that is, often you have to want it to get well, and sometimes it takes some time, right, before the miracle happens. So if the motivating factor is I really want to be part of the future of this business, and I'm not allowed to be part of it unless I get well, it can get someone to look at things that they weren't looking at. So I think you said it beautifully, Josie. And I think it needs to be done very, very methodical with the proper professionals versus the individual that I spoke about earlier, which is, I'm going to just drug test myself, my son or daughter in the business, or use breathalyzers before they start the car. Creates inconsistencies, creates vulnerability for exposure for the company. Work with professionals to help you through this process.
Guys, well, we do have a couple questions that we weren't able to get answered. So the regional resource director in the area for those that ask questions will reach out with some answers from Jonathan and Josie. Thank you guys, Jonathan and Josie, again for your informative presentation, and to all of our attendees for joining us today. As a reminder, this presentation is eligible for 1 continuing education credit. Keep an eye on your email for a link from cego.com to complete your evaluation. Before we close out today's session, just a reminder that in order to receive your credits, you will need to complete that post-webinar evaluation. In addition, I'd like to share some virtual resources that are available from Karen. Please visit our website and find our professional webinars page. You can click on the link to our YouTube channel to find the recordings of all of our 41 previous webinars that range in topics from teens and marijuana to trauma in older adults to our value-based agreements. In addition, you'll find our virtual signature open house series with footage of all of our clinical communities that include Ocean Drive, Grandview Women, and older adult programs. The Grandview Men's Open House is in the works, so stay tuned. We'll be taking a short summer break from webinars, and we'll be back in the fall with more great content. In the meantime, please reach out to your regional resource director at any time for additional information, resources in your area, or questions regarding admissions to any of Karen's programs. Thank you all again for joining us. Have a wonderful afternoon, and thank you again to our fantastic presenters.